Erev Tov Rabotai, we're continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Challah. We're up to Perek Aleph Mishnah Chet. Today's Mishnah Shabil Elim Nishmat Neria ben Svedlana Aranbayev Neliyahu ben Burcha Israelov Minuchatam Began Eden Amen. The following Mishnah deals with the type of bread that is primarily used as animal food. This bread was baked from dough known as dog's dough, which had a large amount of bran mixed into the flour. This dough was used mainly as dog food and it would not be eaten by most people. However, if it did not have too much bran and it was somewhat edible, and shepherds who could not get any other bread easily would eat some of it. Now, sometimes, however, the bread would have so much bran that it was practically inedible, in which case even the shepherd would not eat it. Now, the Mishnah discusses the halakha of this bread with regards to challah and as well as regarding to other various halachot. Isat klavim, regarding dog's dough, bisman she'ro'im uchlin mimena. When the shepherds eat from it, meaning if the bread does not have so much bran that would make it almost inedible, hayavet b'challah, it is subject to the obligation of challah, which applies only to bread. Now, since the shepherds eat it, it's considered bread. Ume'arvin ba, we make an eruv chatzerot with it. An eruv chatzerot is made by putting bread into one of the houses in a courtyard in order to permit carrying between a house and a courtyard on Shabbat. Just as a background, the Mefarshim explain, the rabbis prohibited carrying on Shabbat between a house and a courtyard that has more than one house opening into it. But the rabbis permitted carrying if an eruv chatzerot is made by collecting bread from each of the homeowners and placing the bread in one of the houses. Now, an eruv chatzerot must be made with bread. Other types of food cannot be used. We will speak about it in Masechet Eruvin, chapter 7, Mishnah 10. But the Mishnah is telling us that regarding the dog's dough, if the shepherds eat from it, then it would be subject to obligation of challah, and we can make an eruv chatzerot with it. Umishtatefin ba, we may make shitufei mevoot with it. Shitufei mevoot, which can be made with any food, permits carrying from a courtyard to an alleyway on Shabbat. And Varshim explain, just as the rabbis forbade carrying from a private house to a communal courtyard, the rabbis forbade carrying from a courtyard to an alleyway that has several courtyards opening into it. To permit such a carrying, you have to have shitufei mevoot. This can be done by collecting food from all the residents of the courtyards and placing the food in one of the courtyards. This is in Masechet Eruvin, chapter 7, Mishnah 10. We recite the blessing of Hamotzi on it. We may join zimun on it, meaning if three people eat this bread, they are obligated in the zimun blessing since it's considered bread. And we know, just as a background, the Rav says, when three or more people eat bread together, they recite a certain blessing called the zimun blessing before beginning Birkat Hamazon. The Mishnah teaches that if three people eat this type of dog's bread, they must recite this blessing. Said b'Yom Tov, it may be baked on Yom Tov, even though it's forbidden to bake food for animals on Yom Tov. Now, although it is permitted to bake food on Yom Tov, the Mefarshim say this applies only to food that will be eaten by people, not food that will be fed to animals. Gemara Masechet Betzah, page 21, Daf Aleph and Amud Aleph and Amud Bet. Right? Chaf Aleph, Amud Aleph and Amud Bet. Now, since some of the bread will be eaten by shepherds, it's considered baking for people, not animals. Now, although the shepherds eat only part of the bread, it is nevertheless permitted to bake all the bread, because the entire bread is considered being baked for the shepherds, since if they wish, they can eat the entire bread and give the dogs an animal carcass instead. So the Rambam writes this in Ilchot Yom Tov, chapter 1, on Chaf 14 with the Magen Mishnah. Now, since they have the choice of eating the whole bread, it can be baked on Yom Tov. A person may fulfill his obligation with it on Pesach, meaning if such bread is baked as matzah, one can eat it on the first night of Pesach to fulfill his matzah obligation, because since it is considered bread, it can be made into matzah, which must also be bread. And the Mefarshim explain, the Torah calls the matzah lechem oni, the bread of affliction. Therefore, matzah must be considered bread to be eligible for the mitzvah of the matzah. Here too, since the shepherds eat such dog's bread, is considered bread, and therefore qualifies as lechem oni, matzah, a bread of affliction, when made into matzah. However, the Mishnah says, if the shepherds do not eat from the dog's bread because it contains a large amount of bran, it is not subject to the challah obligation, because since it is eaten only by animals, it is considered animal food. And the pasuk says in Sefer Bamidbar, chapter 15, pasuk 20, Reshit arisutechem, it describes challah as the first of your doughs. The word yor implies that it must be suitable for people to eat. Then me'arvin ba, we may not make an eruvei chatzerot with it. Ben mishtatefin ba, we may not make shitufei mevoot with it, because since such bread is eaten only by animals, it is not considered food at all, and it cannot be used even for shitufei mevoot. Now, although shitufei mevoot does not require bread, it must at least be a food. Now, since even shepherds do not eat this type of dog's bread, it is not considered food with regards to this halakha. Then mevachin aleh, we do not recite the blessing of hamotzi on it, because someone who eats it would recite the blessing of she'akol, not hamotzi, it's not bread. Then mizaminin aleh, we do not join in a zimun because of it, since it's not bread, because just as someone who eats it does not recite the blessing of Hamutzi beforehand, he does not recite Birkat Mazon afterwards, since these blessings are recited certainly only on bread, and certainly then 3 people who would eat such bread would not join in the zimun, which is performed only when Birkat Mazon is recited. It may not be baked on Yom Tov because it is forbidden to do melacha on Yom Tov to prepare food for animals. A person cannot fulfill his matzah obligation with it on Pesach, because the reason for this is that this type of dog's bread is not considered bread, and matzah must be lechem oni, bread of affliction. The Mishnah concludes with the halakha that applies to both types of dog breads. Ben kach uben kach mitame'ah tumat ochalin. In either case, whether the bread is eaten by shepherds or not, it can become tameh under the law of tumah foods. The Torah tells us in Vayikra chapter 11, pasuk 34, that food that comes into contact with certain types of tameh items can become tameh. In a case of a pressing need, even dog's bread that is not normally eaten by shepherds will be eaten by humans. Therefore, with regards to the laws of tumah, it is considered food. Now, the Mefarshim say the reason being because regarding the laws of tumah, anything that is eaten by people under any circumstance is considered food. And since in a case of pressing need, it will be eaten by regular people, it is subject to the laws of tumah. That is in Rabotai of Mishnah Chet. Mishnah Tet now discusses Challah and Terumah. They share many halachot. The Mishnah now is going to list these halachot that they share. And this will be the last Mishnah of Perek Aleph. HaChallah v'Terumah, both Challah and Terumah are subject to the following halachot. Chayevin alein mita v'chomesh. Non-kohanim are liable to the penalty of death for eating them if they did so intentionally, and to the penalty of a fifth if they ate them unintentionally. And the Mefarshim explain, we learn from a pasuk that if a non-kohen eats terumah intentionally, he is punished with death at the hands of heaven. Mita bidei shamayim. This halakha applies also to Challah, because the Torah in Tzeva Bamidbar chapter 15 pasuk 19 to 21 refers to Challah as terumah. And another thing the Mefarshim explain is if a non-Kohen eats terumah by mistake, the Torah in Sefer Vayikra chapter 22 pasuk 14 obligates him to pay back the principal plus an additional fifth, which we explained many times is the penalty is really 1/4 of the principal, which is 1/5 of the final payment. And the same is true for a non-Kohen who eats Challah, since Challah is the same halakha as terumah. V'asurim nezarim, both are forbidden to non-Kohanim. Now the Mefarshim explain, the Mishnah had already taught us that a non-Kohen is punished for eating Challah or Terumah. Now that halakha applies only when he eats a kazait. Here the Mishnah is teaching that even if a non-Kohen eats less than a kazait or of Challah or Terumah, in which case he's not liable to biblical punishment, he has still transgressed a biblical prohibition. Them nichse Kohen, they are the personal property of the Kohanim. The Kohen may sell his Challah and Terumah and use the money to buy anything he wants. The Ulin be'echad u'me'ad, they become nullified in 101 if they get mixed together with Chulin, meaning literally, the words literally mean they become raised in 101. Now the reason the Mishnah is using the term raise is because the halakha is that before the mixture can become permitted, one has to raise, he has to remove from the mixture an amount equal to the Challah or Terumah that got mixed in, give that portion to a Kohen, and once this is done, a non-Kohen may eat the rest of the mixture. Right? Like we said, Olin be'echad u'me'ad, they become nullified in 101 if they get mixed together with Chulin, meaning they become nullified only if there are 100 parts of Chulin for each part of Challah or Terumah. Now when the Mishnah says that they are nullified in 101, it refers to the entire mixture, including the Challah or Terumah. Therefore it is nullified when the mixture contains 100 parts of Chulin and 1 part of Challah or Terumah. Now normally a prohibited substance, a davar asur that is mixed with a permitted substance, a davar eter of the same type, b'mino, it's nullified either if the permitted is the majority, or 60 times more than the prohibited substance, depending on the case. With regards to Challah and Terumah, however, the rabbis decreed that if the Challah and Terumah of the same type became mixed together, they must be 100 times more Chulin in order to nullify the Terumah. Utunin nechitzat yadayim, they require hand washing, meaning one must wash his hands before touching Challah or Terumah. The rabbis decreed that unwashed hands are considered tameh, and therefore if one touches Terumah with such hands, the Terumah becomes tameh. Since a Kohen may not eat Terumah that becomes tameh, the rabbis required us to wash our hands, and the same way wash our hands for bread before touching Terumah. And since Challah has the same laws as Terumah, one must also wash his hands before touching Challah. Ve'arev shemesh, they both require nightfall, meaning if a Kohen became tameh and immersed in a mikveh, he must wait until nightfall to eat challah or terumah. And the Mishnah is teaching that even after a Kohen immerses in a mikveh, he is not considered tahor with regards to eating terumah until nightfall following his immersion. We learn this halakha from a pasuk. Now, similarly, the Mishnah is teaching us that a Kohen must wait until nightfall to eat challah, since challah has the same laws as terumah. And really, all these laws until this point apply to terumat marcel as well. They may not be taken from something that is tahor for something that is tameh, meaning one may not designate a tahor piece of dough as challah for tameh dough, or designate tahor produce as terumah for tameh produce. Now this is a rabbinic decree. The rabbis were concerned that if one would use tahor produce as terumah for tameh produce, he might specifically keep the terumah at a distance from the rest of the produce, that the terumah should not touch the produce and become tameh. And because we know terumah that is tameh may not be eaten, and the halakha is that when separating terumah, the terumah must be close to the rest of the produce. Therefore, to prevent people from separating terumah incorrectly, the rabbis decreed that one may not use tahor produce as terumah for tameh produce. Rather, you should use only tameh produce for the terumah. This decree applies to challah as well, because challah must also be next to the rest of the dough when it is separated, like we will learn. Ela mina mukaf, right? They may not be taken from something that is tahor, from something that is tameh, and they are taken only from something that is close by. Literally, mina mukaf means that which is surrounding it, from something that is in the same area, meaning the challah or terumah to be close to the rest of the dough or produce when they are being designated. This halakha we learn from a pasuk. The Yerushalmi Masechet Terumot chapter 2 Mishnah 1 discusses it, or halakha 1. Now, there are many rules concerning what is considered close to the rest of the produce. The Rambam speaks about it in Chut Terumot, chapter 3, halakha 17 to 19. Umina davar gamur, they are taken only from something that is finished, meaning in the case of challah, the dough must already be made before designating challah. And in the case of terumah, the produce must be fully processed. We learn from a pasuk that terumah is to be separated only after produce is processed. Now, the exact stage at which produce is considered processed depends on the type of produce. We spoke about this in Masechet Maasrot, chapter 1, Mishnah 4 and 5. For example, grain is considered processed when it's smoothed into a pile. Therefore, one should not separate terumah from grain before this point. We learn from a different pasuk that challah is compared to terumah regarding this law. Therefore, challah is also not to be separated until the dough is processed, which is after it is kneaded. Now, it should be noted that in some cases the rabbis instituted that challah must be separated before the kneading is complete. We will see in chapter 3, Mishnah 1. The Mishnah concludes now with the final halakha that applies to both terumah and challah. Ha'omer kol garni terumah. If someone says, all the grain in my silo is terumah, v'chol yisatit challah, or my entire dough is challah, lo amar klum, he has not said anything, meaning the terumah challah does not take effect, ad sheyisher miktzat, until he leaves over a part that is not terumah or challah. Only a portion of the produce or dough is to be separated as terumah or challah, not all of it, because the Mefarshim say that the Torah calls terumah reshit arisotechem, reshit tvuatcha, the first of your grain in several dvarim, chapter 18, pasuk 4. This teaches us that there must be another portion that is not terumah, and therefore, if one designates all his produce as terumah, it does not take effect, and the produce remains tevel, unless he leaves over some produce that will not be terumah. And similarly, the Torah in Sefer Bamidbar, chapter 15, pasuk 20, calls challah reshit arisotechem, the first of your doughs. Therefore, there must be one part of the dough that is challah, another part that is not. And that is in Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi, and that is the end of Rabotai of chapter Aleph, Perik Aleph in the Mishnayot. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.